it was around 2022 when ChatGPT came out that everybody started getting really excited about AI. But AI has been around for a long time, and AI ethics has preceded, the recent explosion of interest for a long time also. Um, And also, we really need to think about what we think. What are we talking about when we talk about AI? Some people just talk about large language models, for example. Is it producing text? Can you talk to it? Is it generative AI and it makes pictures or images or other things like that? But of course, there's also machine learning for data analysis. There are various sorts of artificial neural networks that can do different sorts of things. And going back farther into the past, there are things like expert systems, which are basically very large decision trees or other sorts of complicated uh, things like that, but are much more predictable in their outputs or mechanical in their outputs in some ways. So one of the things going on with contemporary AI is that we have huge data sets. We have now huge amounts of computing power. We have very talented individuals who can utilize these things, and we also have a lot of money that's going on to these or into these three areas. So by having these components put together, all of a sudden it becomes a lot more just powerful overall. One of the things that people discovered is that just increasing the scale has had an enormous impact on the efficiency and usefulness of a lot of these neural network algorithms, for example, or transformer architecture that they're using for large language models. But that's all the technological side of it. Of course, the business side of it is that we have a lot of the time small companies like OpenAI and Anthropic, or at least they started small. Now they're becoming huge. They have the talent. They're the places where the talent comes together, and then they've got the money because they needed the computing power. They've often partnered with a very large company in order to get access to those resources. So the business aspect of this is also quite interesting. Um, all these things, all of this greatly expanded power results in a greater need for ethics. So just like Spider-Man says, with great power comes great responsibility, or you can go to many, many religions that have similar things like to whom much is given, much shall be expected. All of these, it's a general understanding in human culture that if you have more power, you have more responsibility. You have to take care of what you're doing much more carefully. So a lot of these ethics issues that have come up are things like, does it work in the first place? The very first question is, does it work? Is AI actually going to give you what you want in this particular situation? Is it providing the benefit that it's supposed to be providing? Or is it providing it 95% of the time, but then, a certain percent of the time it's making a big mistake or something like that? So there are all these sorts of trade-offs that have to be made when it comes to function and just the basic question of does it work? And very often it'll work very well, but it might work in a way that's a little bit inscrutable to humans. That's another question. Can we actually understand what it's doing? Or is it operating in such a way that's very different, that's very hard to understand? And if it is hard for humans to understand, then that introduces a certain amount of complexity in the relationship where people need to be trained to understand exactly what to expect, how to interact with these systems. There are also lots of questions about data privacy. Is this data private? Is it secure, or is it vulnerable to being hacked? Surveillance questions. Is it right to be collecting all this information about people? There's the justice and access question. One of the things that Daphne and Manoj are talking about here is they're making this technology accessible to people and thereby really helping them to achieve the benefits that this technology has in a way that was no longer or was not there previously. So they're really taking it out there and giving the benefits to people, which is fantastic. Related to the justice and access question is also the question of fairness and bias. So some people are helped more by AI than others are, and there's a fairness question that is hiding in the background there. Very often the data sets will be biased towards certain areas of the world or certain types of people. Is there some way that we can take these biased data sets and turn them into something that will be more universally helpful to people? There are lots of questions having to do with employee impact and labor impact in terms of layoffs, training, all those sorts of things about ethical culture in a corporation, for example, but also, of course, the ethical impact on the world. There's a lot of uncertainty around AI right now, and people have become worried about it in many ways. So that's just something that's bigger picture. Large picture worries, however, we should not let that get in the way of the concrete benefits, once again, that Daphne and Manoj are presenting here, where you really have something. It would be unfortunate if those sorts of benefits were prevented by some sort of larger abstract worry that's not necessarily going to be affecting what they're doing with the good work that they're doing in their particular areas. And so the last thing I would say is that all of these things have an impact on trust. And this trust question is something that is one of the most important things in business, right? You want to have trusting relationships between clients and between your organization, between consumers of the product, your users. If you maintain that trust, then that's of course good for business. But if you violate that trust, that can be very bad for business. And of course, the best way to have trust in those relationships is to be trustworthy. And that's really where ethics comes in. If you have a reputation of taking ethics seriously, then that will give you a certain amount of trustworthiness that then will build trusting relationships with the people that you're working with.
Thank you, Brian. That was really helpful, and probably I'm not the only one whose head is spinning with all the different variables that you just shared. You're also, I think, the first guest in 6 years we've had who has invoked a comic book superhero, and congratulations for that. But further to this idea of more, more power, more responsibility, one could also say maybe more mission, more responsibility. Do you, Brian, think that social impact entrepreneurs have a higher standard to live up to when it comes to AI ethics? Given
Yes, and the answer is yes, because exactly what you described. If your mission is to provide social benefit, then people are going to look at that mission and hold you to a higher standard because of it. And you might say to yourself, that's not fair. We're already trying to do something, we're already trying to do something good. Shouldn't people cut us some slack? But that's not really how human psychology works. Instead, what they say is that we're going to hold you to a higher standard. And what's, I guess, associated with that is also that people do understand that a for-profit company is trying to make profit. That always gives them kind of a skeptical edge to them. So you look at the big tech companies, for example, people tend to look at them rather skeptically these days. But that's also a product of their reputation and not perhaps living up to their own ethical standards that they've set for themselves. If you set ethical standards, if you have an ethical mission, it's really important to fulfill that mission. And one of the things that we try to do at the Markkula Center is we really try to provide people with the resources for ethical decision making and for thinking about the ethics in their particular context that will really help them to fulfill their ethical mission. And so once again, you can argue about the fairness of it, but actually I think it's an opportunity also, which is that when we put these standards out there for ourselves, it's also an opportunity to become the best people that we can be and produce the best organization and the best outcome that is created by that organization. So I think it's a really big opportunity, but yes, it is also something to be aware of, that there is that standard there.